Dear viewers, dear listeners, you are warmly welcome to another program from the series, The Inner Path to Cosmic Consciousness. Today, we have arrived at the 10th installment on the level of order, which is the first level on the path to the love for God and neighbor. It is the path of the Christ of God, who is calling to us at this time with the following words: "Come, all who labor and are heavy burdened, to me, to the Christ of God. I want to help you and lead you to the Father." These words give us courage and assurance for our life. Perhaps you have had the same experience as we. When we take the time and gain a certain distance from the hectic pace of daily life, for example, by taking a quiet walk in nature or in a quiet prayer of the heart, then a very fine and deep sensation stirs in us that lets us sense that we are not of this world. So why are we here on earth? What is the meaning of our life? Jesus of Nazareth said, "Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." So we are here in this world to learn, to recognize and change our negative characteristics and patterns of behavior. We could also say the burdens of our soul, the shadows that darken the light in us, so that we again become the being that we are in the very basis of our soul, pure, noble, and kind, a cosmic being that lives and works in connection with God and according to His will and in His love. The inner path to God in us leads us to this goal step by step. It is the path of self-recognition and of the schooling of the heart, which is also a topic in the program for today. The explanations, the tasks, and exercises that we receive on the inner path were given to us from the kingdom of God by the divine wisdom through Gabriella, the prophetess and emissary of God in our time. Christo, Bettina, and I, my name is Jeanette, will read you more passages from the schooling text as pupils among pupils. If you would like to read the explanations and tasks, they are found in the 4th chapter of the book, The Inner Path to the Cosmic Consciousness. So if you would like to, do take paper and pen to hand to make notes, or write down any questions that may come up during our reading, which we would be glad to receive from you via the address blended in below and given at the end of our program.
Today we will continue with a new task for training our organ of sight. As Brother Emmanuel, the cherub of divine wisdom, explained to us, this exercise has a deep significance, so that we may get to know ourselves and, at the same time, awaken step by step in us the awareness that we are a part of the great all-unity of creation. Before we come to the exercise, we will briefly repeat the explanations given by our spiritual teacher. He revealed the following: so that you also get to know yourself in all the elemental spheres, and in time learn that the essence of all life forms is in you, and that you are a part of infinity. You have to recognize yourself and experience the limitations, the all too human aspects that still lie in you and that create the distance to the unity consciousness and the all consciousness. The unity consciousness is the unity with the nature kingdoms, with all people, beings, and things. The all-consciousness is to live from the Spirit of God. In our book, Gabriele explains the next task. Dear brother, dear sister, you will now receive another task, so that you may come to know yourself more and more deeply, and so that you gain a very light sense of what unity consciousness means. Now you take in the nature kingdoms, the total impression of the outer life forms that offer themselves to you. This means that you do not perceive the individual components of the nature kingdoms, such as a stone, a plant, or an animal, but nature, everything that lives in it, as a total impression. At first, the outer impression, the outer picture. Then you take the total impression to within. Wait some moments until the correspondences or the expressions of your consciousness rise up and convey to you what your inner being wants to tell you. Again, write down the sensations and thoughts that you become aware of externally as well as internally. Record in your mystical journal the outer impressions as well as the inner ones, the sensations and thoughts that come up in this process.
Brother Emmanuel, our spiritual teacher, gives us more indications for our path in our teaching text, so that we can open our heart for our neighbor, for the animals, and for the life in nature, for God in us more and more. He said the following: with these exercises, I would like to convey to you a small part of the unity consciousness. In addition, you learn to recognize your base ego, which lies in the deeper layers, in your subconscious and in your soul garments. But you also find out the extent of your selfless love. The observation of the outer and inner pictures bring out those sensations and thoughts in which the pupil, the pilgrim on the path to God, can recognize himself. By training your senses, you come to the schooling of the heart. Through this schooling, you will recognize very soon that every negative sensation, every impure thought, and every negative action turns against you. The alert student who is aligned with God will then no longer wish his neighbor evil or condemn him. He will no longer entertain negative thoughts against his neighbor. His words will be noble and pure, for he knows that whatever goes out from him will fall back on him. The conscious pilgrim on the path to God feels that God, the life, is in all being. He knows that whatever he does to life, he ultimately inflicts on himself. The one who controls himself and wants to progress on the path to God will strive to see the good in his neighbor and to also affirm it. This is the selfless power, the life of infinity. The pure and beautiful in your neighbor, the life, God, is in every human being, even in the one who is still marked by his ego and unconsciously betrays his ego through his words, gestures, and actions. Therefore, do not judge, because through this you become your own judge. The person who truly strives toward God will endeavor every day to meet his neighbor with his heart and not with his intellect. For the intellect denigrates the neighbor and sees him as he thinks and speaks. The heart, however, is a gift to sense, which lets one look deeper, which accepts the person, understands him, and shows this understanding for him. This is the preliminary step towards selfless love. Gabriella made us aware of the following. Dear brother, dear sister, through self-recognition to which Brother Emmanuel wants to lead us, and which in many cases streams from the unconscious, from the correspondences that show us who we actually are, we will become more empathetic, more understanding toward our neighbor, because we have come to recognize that whatever annoys us about our neighbor is still in us. And so we recognize that we are not flawless, but that we are marked by the same or similar faults as our neighbor. This makes us understanding, and from this understanding then grows the love for God, who sees us as perfect, who does not punish or chastise us, but teaches us the way back to the Father's house. The person who gradually recognizes himself and struggles to free himself from his base ego, from thinking only in terms of his own person, will also gain much understanding for his neighbor, who, after all, also struggles on the path to life. No matter on which level our neighbor is, no matter if he is still with this world, he will awaken the feeling of the heart, the true feeling for his fellow man and for all being, through self-recognition and by struggling with himself to free himself from his base ego. Because of his experience of self and self-recognition, he then has the possibility to understand the Sermon on the Mount in the right way and to actualize it in his daily life.
We continue reading in the teaching text. Brother Emmanuel gave us an important advice for our path. He said, "On the level of order you hear again and again, put your thoughts in order, curb your speech, master your senses." Where do your thoughts come from? Gabriella explained the following to this. We will now go after our thoughts, and in the end we will be convinced that many thoughts stream from our sensations. We will take another step and recognize that many sensations arise from the burdens, from the correspondences of the soul and of the subconscious. In the soul, too, there are memories of things and events which once burdened soul and person. And so these were correspondences that are now settled and atoned for. They remain in the soul as memories, but also external joyful and painful impressions can leave their mark on the soul as memories. These were not burdens, but forceful or memorable events or occurrences. We should therefore come to know the subtle differences between memories and correspondences. When thoughts or pictures rise from memories, they help us to understand our neighbor or to recognize a situation correctly and to accept it as well. We do not get upset in the process, but are above the momentary situation. We see clearly and can handle it in the right way so that it does not become a burden. But when we react from our correspondences, we are annoyed, perhaps even agitated or upset. We are not in control of the situation, but we think or speak around the point. Our actions will then be similar. Brother Emmanuel gave us a further tip. He said, "Dear students, the more sensitive you become by fulfilling the soul prayer and the tasks, the more easily you will be able to recognize a positive or a negative thought. When you have reached a certain sensitivity, you will no longer be satisfied with analyzing your thoughts. In many cases, you will pay more attention to your sensations and where they come from.
Gabriele then stated the following: Dear sister, dear brother, again and again we are asked if it is right for a person to be so preoccupied with himself. While we are taking the first steps on the path within, it is good, so that we recognize ourselves. We have to first walk from without to within. We have to soften the external aspects, the all too human, the hard shell. This means we have to surrender our negativities and thus uncover what is within, the noble, the pure, and beautiful, so that it can grow from within to without. However, on the path within, we should not look into every vagabond thought to analyze where it comes from. In the course of our life on earth, countless thoughts fly toward us. These are vagabonds, thoughts that were sent out by people and are buzzing around in the atmosphere, looking for a victim where they can nestle in and multiply. We do not follow up on such vagabond thoughts. We pay them no attention. We recognize these flying objects by the fact that they briefly come to our mind and then disappear. They do not upset us. The decisive point is that they do not annoy us. However, as soon as we repeatedly think about them or become upset when we do, then the same or like is also in us. We will then analyze them insofar as these thoughts influence us more strongly, tormenting us. When we have successfully reached the third level on the inner path, we will be more connected to God in our daily life. What we have actualized then flows from us as fulfilled power, as fulfilled life. Our senses have turned within. We have become finer, nobler, and purer. Gradually, we become active in a selfless way. This means that we become people of the Spirit, who live more and more from within to without, thus becoming selfless servants of mankind. We will then no longer expect praise or recognition from our neighbor. We strive to live according to the law, to pray and work, and as we continue on our path, we let our activities become a prayer. However, when we begin the inner path, we first have to work our way into our inner being and uncover it, so that it can then grow from within to without.
Brother Emmanuel gave us further tasks. He said, watch the ever-recurring thoughts. When a thought or even a thought complex keeps moving you again and again, ask where they come from. With this exercise, you reach your sensations, which may only be stirrings. These ever-recurring sensations, thoughts and stirrings which burden you are the ones that should be looked into. That is, they should be analyzed. Where do they come from? What are the causes of these bothersome influences? These troublemakers, the all-too-human sensations, thoughts, and stirrings, are often components which the person himself has created during this life. They appear especially when doing the spiritual exercises, because through the exercises, the human aspects come more strongly into motion. And so, through these exercises, desires, events, and conceptions rise to the surface again. It is that which has not been overcome, which lies in the subconscious and in the soul garments. Therefore, give over the thoughts that simply come flying toward you. Let go of them and let them be transformed in Christ, in the spirit of redemption. However, you should analyze what continually moves or even influences and depresses you. Many people keep bringing back what is already far in the past, again and again. They move it about for hours and days, thus intensifying the correspondence in their subconscious and in their soul garments. I ask you to let the past rest as much as possible, so that it may gradually dry out. When, despite all efforts to let the past rest, events from this life come up, that is, when they keep coming up again and again, then you should look into these sensations and analyze them. The one who lives in his past cannot master what comes toward him day after day. He will not attain mastery over his own life. He's subject to his human ego.
Gabriele gave us further important indications. What can the analysis of the past, which we take into the present and move over and over again, tell us? It may tell us that we have not yet forgiven our neighbor, who caused us difficulties in the past. Therefore, to overcome these aspects of our past, we should forgive or, if necessary, ask for forgiveness. For guilt is very rarely only one-sided. Most of the time, the one more strongly affected has also acted against his neighbor, at least in his thoughts. Thoughts are powers. Negative thoughts, too, create guilt. For instance, we were treated badly in the past by one of our fellow men. An outer picture, an outer impulse, stimulates our inner world of sensations. The impressions from the past come to light again. The past flares up. If we do not live in discipline and self-control, we will dwell on the past for hours and days. By doing this, we increase our correspondences in our subconscious as well as in our soul garments. Brother Emmanuel asked us the following questions and referred to our past. The alert student will ask himself again and again, why do I still think about past occurrences and events? What is it that I have not overcome? What does the past want to tell me? The one who has not overcome the past cannot master the present.
Gabriele explained the following to this. And so, our sensations tell us more than our thoughts. They tell the serious pilgrim on the path within what he is still lacking. Our correspondences and sensations tell us who we really are. When we have recognized ourselves, we should act by fighting the negative, our all-too-human aspects. If we have wronged our neighbor, then we should clear up the matter, ask for forgiveness, and make amends for what we have done to our neighbor, so that we can progress on the path to life. On the path within, we will experience again and again that nothing happens by chance in all of infinity. As long as we live with our consciousness in the four spheres of purification, we live in the causal law, in the law of cause and effect. When we acknowledge the causal law, we understand that in the last analysis, every effect has its cause, either in this life or in former earthly lives. Dear viewers, dear listeners, today we received many questions, indications, and tasks so that we seriously think about ourselves and work on ourselves, and at the same time, a wonderful prospect was shown to us in terms of where the inner path leads us to the experience of the unity with creation and with all of life, to a deeper understanding for our neighbor, and to the selfless love. In the end, to the higher culture in the Messianic, Sophianic age, in the awareness of God in us. We have now drawn to the end of our program today. Surely many will want to read about the exercises and explanations again. They are in the 4th chapter of the book, The Inner Path to the Cosmic Consciousness. And if you have any questions to the program, do send them in to the address blended in below at the end of our program. We invite you very warmly to our next program, in which we will be listening to the explanations about body rhythm and receive tasks on the teaching of the sense of hearing. Until next time, greetings in God, and goodbye. Part of mankind still feels that it more or less belongs to a religious orientation. Most people do one of the 5 major world religions: Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, or Judaism. Many members of religions trust their respective religious leaders. They believe their priests. Consciously or unconsciously, traditions and rituals shape their lives. Let's just take the commandment, "You shall not kill," which is surely known to everyone and which is generally acknowledged among all nations and all religious orientations. Buddha lived in northern India 560 to 480 before Christ. According to legend, he was born as Prince Siddhartha in a noble family. He grew up in luxury, but, as has been passed down, it was pointed out to him that in his previous life on earth he had promised to use his next life to help people so as to free them from suffering. It's said that one day he recognized his pleasant life up to then as being senseless. At age 29, soon after the birth of his only son, Buddha left his child, his wife, and his homeland, and, searching for redemption, became an ascetic. However, since this did not bring him any closer to his goals, he turned away from the traditional religions of that time and sought his own path primarily in meditation. He called this the middle path. It is said that he finally found enlightenment under a tree. Buddha taught men and women of all social classes for a total of 45 years. He died at the age of 80. His teachings were first passed on orally by his disciples and only written down about 200 to 300 years after his death. Non-violence, and thus also consistent abstention from eating meat, that is, vegetarianism, was considered by Buddha to be one of the most important steps on the path to self-recognition. Let's hear several quotes on this topic. They demonstrate how clearly and distinctly he expressed himself on this subject. Eating meat kills the seed of great mercy for all living beings. My love belongs to the creatures. May all created and living beings, may all beings, no matter of which kind, not experience anything through which disaster threatens them. May nothing bad ever happen to them. From something that has been passed down, we learn the following. While collecting alms, Buddha and his followers met a group of children who were wantonly tearing the legs off a crab, and he said, "Every living being deserves to enjoy a feeling of security and well-being. We must protect life and give happiness to others. All living beings, whether large or small, two or four-legged, whether they swim or fly, all have the right to live. We may not injure or even kill other living beings. We must protect life." Buddha predicted the developing falsification of his teachings. He warned of this with the words, "After I pass on, various kinds of spirit beings will appear everywhere that lead people astray by teaching that man may eat meat and can nevertheless attain enlightenment." Buddha pointed out the responsibility that meat-eaters bear for the fact that a living being has to die for them. He explained, "The eater or buyer indirectly is to blame for the suffering of the animals, because through his consumption or his demand, he boosts supply." And he also pointed out the many illnesses, which he even listed individually, that could affect people through meat consumption. He also taught that animals are primarily killed for the money that is earned through the sale of the meat. Buddha said that if no one were to eat meat or buy it, no one would kill animals for this purpose. Buddha's explanations about empathy with the creatures of the earth were, however, a thorn in the side of the priests and monks of that time. Right from the beginning, they tried to give Buddha's words a different direction, yes, to change them into their opposite, by claiming that with his teachings he merely wanted to express that only those are not allowed to eat meat who have no compassion. Anyone who has compassion for God's creatures, as Buddha's teachings mandated, could therefore, in their opinion, indeed eat meat. But in reality, this was the falsification of Buddha's teachings by priests and monks. In some countries, even today, there are the so-called original Buddhist small communities, which, for instance, as in Thailand, operate vegetarian restaurants or snack bars. They are convinced that at some point a person will have to endure the same torments that he has caused to other living beings. Buddha taught absolute nonviolence toward all living beings. According to his teachings, the commandment, "You shall not kill," therefore also holds true for war. No difference is made here between offensive and defensive war. The following original teaching regarding this has been passed down. One day, soldiers asked Buddha for his opinion concerning whether a warrior who dies a hero's death would go to heaven. After some hesitation, Buddha replied that there was no way that such a warrior would go to heaven, but would land in a certain kind of hell, because at the moment of death, his spirit is in a bad condition. For ultimately he, the warrior, wishes the enemy, that is his fellow man, death. Buddha, however, taught absolute nonviolence toward man, nature, and animals. At the latest, since the film about Mahatma Gandhi, many people associate India with nonviolence. With the commandment of absolute nonviolence, Gandhi fought for India's independence from the colonial rule of the British, which had lasted 160 years. His belief was based on the original Hinduism, the over 5,000-year-old Indian Vedic scriptures. The ideal of nonviolence and the respect for all living beings has existed for thousands of years in India, whereby this also includes a vegetarian diet. Thus, also today, the most religiously motivated vegetarians on earth are found in India. In the scriptures of the Hindus, particularly the Vedas, which represent the entirety of the oldest texts in the literature of India, there are very many statements and commandments that speak against violence, and accordingly also against a diet including meat. And so it says, for instance, in Manu Samhita, an ancient law book, by not killing any living being, one becomes fit for salvation. Mahatma Gandhi said about this, I believe that the spiritual progress of a nation can be measured by how it treats its animals. And yet the commandment of not killing living beings was also qualified and circumvented in Hinduism. For example, there were sacrificial rituals with the reasoning that the flesh of the sacrificed animals does not come under this law and can also be eaten afterward without compunction, that is, without the eater suffering damage to his soul. Sacral killings of animals are permitted. Meat consumption within the framework of the ritual is allowed. Only the eating of meat outside of rituals was forbidden. But the sacrificial rituals with the consumption of meat are a falsification of the original Hindu teachings done by priests. A large part of the population of India, however, is still vegetarian up until today. The tradition of nonviolence is deeply rooted in the people. Certainly the belief in reincarnation also plays a decisive role in this, because the people in India do not want to burden themselves by killing living beings, be it humans or animals. However, we must mention that through the influence of the West, shaped by Catholicism and Protestantism, the consumption of meat has increased more and more, also in India, not lastly through Western fast food chains. Interesting is that Mahatma Gandhi read the Bhagavad Gita, the best-known scripture in Hinduism, with totally different eyes than many of his fellow brethren. He recognized that the great fighting event, which makes up the main part of the scripture, is merely an allegory for an inner struggle, namely, a challenge to face the enemy in oneself, against one's favorite habits, passions, and much more. On the other hand, others saw and see in the fighting events of the Bhagavad Gita an external fight, and thus also confirmation for wars and military build-up, and this with fatal consequences. It was totally different with Mahatma Gandhi. Through his life, according to the ancient laws of nonviolence, he demonstrated that great things can be attained without violence, even liberating an entire country from the clutches of colonial rule. Approximately 17 million people avow to the Jewish religion. Of these, about 7 million live in the U.S. alone. Doubtlessly, no other people had so many prophets of God in its midst. How does it look in Judaism concerning the teaching of nonviolence and the killing of animals? The Jewish law book, the Torah, clearly taught, "You shall not kill." So reads the fifth commandment of God through Moses. It is reported how God revealed the 10 Commandments to his prophet Moses on Mount Sinai, and Moses engraved these commandments on stone tablets. On these tablets, there was nothing to be read about exceptions to the forbiddance of killing. Through the great prophets of Israel, God always warned against every form of violence and above all, against the temptation of war. And so he said through Moses, for example, "The Lord will fight for you and you have only to be still." According to this report, the enemy soldiers did not die by the hand of the Israelites, but through a natural disaster. And how is it regarding animals? Nonviolence regarding animals, that is, a vegetarian diet, is not generally taught in modern Orthodox Judaism as a biblical precept. However, it is undisputed that in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, which from ecclesiastical points of view are also a part of the Bible, the original food is described now and in the future Messianic age as vegetarian. So it is stated in the first book of Moses, Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, "And God said, Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food." The Talmud, one of the most significant writings in Judaism, agrees with this original form of food. There it says, among other things, Adam was not permitted to eat flesh. Another passage from the Talmud that speaks against eating meat reads, "The Jew who is not merciful toward everything that God created is not a true Jew." The person who is merciful toward his fellow creatures receives mercy from heaven, but whoever is not merciful toward his fellow creatures cannot count on receiving mercy from above. This last statement indicates the law of cause and effect, which is also called the law of karma in Eastern countries, and which also decisively shapes the Holy Scriptures of Judaism. From Adam until Noah, that is, for 10 generations, according to biblical tradition, the people of Israel lived according to God's commandment, that is, purely vegetarian. But after Noah, God allegedly changed his mind and allowed the eating of meat. Back then, Noah himself is said to have killed and burned many animals, which he had just saved from the deluge with much expense and effort. Isn't that a contradiction? First he rescued the animals, and then he supposedly killed them. With the prophet Isaiah, God warned in terms of the eating of animal flesh. "What to me is the multitude of your sacrifices, says the Lord. I have had enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of the well-fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls, or of lambs, or of goats. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood." The message of the other prophets of God reads exactly the same way, such as in Hosea, Amos, and Jeremiah. God speaks as follows through the prophet Jeremiah. For in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, I did not speak to your fathers or command them concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. But this command I gave them: Obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people. Through the prophet Isaiah, God even equates the murder of animals with the murder of people, and again most strongly condemns burnt offerings. Quote, He who slaughters an ox is like one who kills a man. The commandment, You shall not kill, which the great Jewish prophet of God Moses received on Mount Sinai as revealed by God, was and is still valid, also regarding animals. For exceptions to this commandment weren't written on the stone tablets with the 10 Commandments that are venerated in Judaism. And these tablets, with the forbiddance of killing and the observance of the commandments engraved on them, were considered in Judaism to be a guarantee for the presence of God. Worldwide, about 1.2 billion people avow to Islam, which is thus the second largest religion after Christianity. The Muslims are represented through 2 main streams, the Shiites and the Sunnites, whereby with 90% the latter are the majority. Islamic rules of faith are based on the Quran, which is considered to be a revelation of the Prophet Muhammad conveyed through the angel Gabriel. It is supplemented by passed-down instructions and actions of Muhammad, known as the Sunnah and Hadith. According to tradition, Muhammad lived in Mecca during the 6th and 7th centuries after Christ, as well as in Medina in Saudi Arabia. What has been passed down about Muhammad's life also contains statements about a non-violence-oriented attitude toward animals and an animal-friendly diet, which say, for instance, that he enjoyed milk diluted with water, yogurt with butter, or nuts and cucumbers with dates. The pomegranate is said to have been his favorite fruit, which he would also subsist on for weeks at a time. In one popular tradition, Muhammad is said to have rebuked his followers for failing to show compassion. But we do show compassion, they responded, to our wives, children, and relatives, but the Prophet insisted, It is not this to which I refer, I am speaking of the universal mercy. And in the 6th surah of the Quran it reads, There is not an animal that lives on the earth, nor a being that flies on its wings, but forms part of communities like you. Nothing have we omitted from the book, and they all shall be gathered to their Lord in the end. Even though Islam is not considered a religion in which vegetarianism and animal protection are prominent, there are numerous statements and stories that report of a connection between humans and animals. Thus, for instance, on their pilgrimage to Mecca, it is forbidden for the faithful to kill an animal as long as they have not taken off their shroud, the ihram. Independent of this, there are also numerous statements about Muhammad's compassionate relationship to animals. Quote, During the killing, the butcher must look the animal in the eyes, and if he sees tears in the animal's eyes, he should also shed tears. In this way, perhaps he will gain insight, and henceforth not want to kill any animals. Today, only various movements among the Shiites and the Sufis view vegetarianism as the ideal diet. In the Quran can be found statements that prescribe nonviolence as well as such that condone a so-called holy war. Anyone who seeks confirmation for war and violence can find it. Anyone who seeks words for the peaceful living together of people, but also of people, nature, and animals, can likewise find this. In conclusion, let's have a look at Christianity. How does it look here with the commandment, "You shall not kill"? Christianity bases itself on the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, who gave people an understanding of God as the loving Father of all his children, who lived the commandment of love for God and neighbor in practice. As old, so-called apocryphal scriptures outside of the Bible confirm, this also included Jesus' love for the animals, which for him meant a meatless diet. But the New Testament also clearly describes the nonviolence of Jesus of Nazareth. And so Jesus says in his Sermon on the Mount, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not kill,' and whoever kills will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment." While Jesus of Nazareth expands the fifth commandment, "You shall not kill," to include anger, the priests and theologians did exactly the opposite. They allowed killing and changed the commandment, "You shall not kill," which had been taught for nearly 2,000 years, into, "You shall not murder." And now, since 1985, this is what it literally says, for instance, in the German Ecumenical Bible translation, as well as in numerous English versions. "You shall not murder," which means that according to church doctrine, you may kill people in certain cases. With no word did Jesus call for violence, but always for peaceableness. However, today his teachings are virtually dismissed by the church as utopian, which the so-called representative of God on earth and religious leader of more than 1 billion people, the Pope, bore witness to himself. Pope John Paul II literally said, "We are not pacifists." We see that in Christianity there is practically nothing left of the nonviolent teaching of the pacifist Jesus, and it is precisely those who claim to be the guardians of religion who falsified the original teachings and turned them into their opposite. This also holds true in the relationship between people and animals. Following are several examples that provide evidence that Jesus and his disciples did not have any animals killed and lived on plants and fruit. In the book by Karl Anders Schreiber, How Jesus and the First Christians Lived, there is a quote from the Clementine Homilies, a scripture that was written around the year 220 in Palestine, and it says there, "Peter lived on bread and olives, to which he sometimes added vegetables." It was similarly reported about the disciple Matthew. The church author Clemens of Alexandria wrote about him that he, quote, "lived on seeds, the fruit of trees, and vegetables without meat." And the religion scholar Schreiber adds, according to the witness of the authors of the 2nd century, the apostles Andreas, Philip, John, and Thomas, as well as the evangelists Mark and Luke, were vegetarians. And this also holds true for James, the brother of Jesus. He was the first leader of the original community in Jerusalem and is referred to in the Bible as one of the pillars of early Christianity. The doctor of the church Hegesippus wrote about James around the year 180 that he lived on seeds and plants and touched neither meat nor wine. However, the lifestyle of the first original Christians in Palestine was a bone of contention for many people, because the temple with its daily animal sacrifices was the religious and political center of society. And for each of the many celebrations during the course of the year, certain slaughters were prescribed. The consumption of certain pieces of meat at the feasts was considered not only an eating habit, but also as obedience to a god who allegedly commanded such things. For this reason, the priests of that time viewed the animal-friendly lifestyle of the followers of Jesus as a defection from their religion. This accusation cost James his life in the year 62 after Christ, when he was stoned to death by adherents of the priests. The fact is that Jesus and the first Christians refused slaughtering and eating of animals out of love for all creatures, and they ate meat only when they were invited and did not want to offend the host who had wanted to give them a treat. But they also carefully explained to the host that the commandment "you shall not kill" also applies to animals. According to the apocryphal Gospel of the Ebionites, Jesus said, "I came to destroy the sacrifices." He came to re-establish the original order of creation, the unity of man, nature, and animals.
No more uncertainty about God, the free spirit, about universal values and our life. Young people speak about very diverse topics, freely and frankly, with the prophetess of the present time. The Youth and the Prophet. Order the pamphlet now, free of charge. Just right for all those looking for a deeper meaning in life.